There we go. Let's see if I'm rolling. Check if everything's good. Says I'm live. Let's see if I am. All right. Says I am. All right. That. All right. Get myself set up. All right. Book is set up. Do this. See what I'm looking at. There we go. Hop out there. That's open. Close you. You. All right. Close up my recording studio. All right. That should get everything ready. 5 minutes to kill. All right. Messing around with that. I don't know. All right. See. That working? Yes, I do. Let me see if I can do this. Let's. All right. Thank you, Robin. A whole bunch of books here from my library. So, library. And hey. Alright, let's see where my last spot. So there. Alright. Plug this in. One way to do it. I used to have this in print form a long time ago, but regrettably not enough space. It happens. So this is going to be a little bit early. Message Robin. And the guy that I'm commissioning to do my layout, let him know I'm here. Alright. Would be one quill snip, by the way. Go watch his stuff. Where's the Robin that I mentioned? Go find her on Reddit under Bo Bobbin. She does some pretty good folk music. Sings a whole lot better than I do. So, a minute early. I can handle it. Alright, so where we left off from last time, we did the prelude and we did the first voyage and the second voyage. So now, it's time for the third voyage. As I said, Sinbad has come back for more voyages. So he said Sinbad has paid him, so he's going to keep coming. Almost a commitment. So, we're going to start off here with Sinbad on the third voyage. And I picked a better translation, I think. The later translation, 1895 version. I'll have to look up who translated that one, but it seems to be a little bit better. There are some idiosyncrasies in this more recent version, if you want to call it recent, but still readable. Dry throat. Of course that's going to happen. Hydrate, kids. So to start, after a very short time, the pleasant, easy life I led made me quite forget the perils of my two voyages. Moreover, as I was still in the prime of life, it pleased me better to be up and doing. So once more providing myself with the rarest and choicest merchandise of Baghdad, I conveyed it to Balsora, and set sail with other merchants of my acquaintance for distant lands, We had touched many ports and made much profit, when one day, upon the open sea, we were caught by a terrible wind which blew us completely out of our reckoning, and lasting for several days, finally drove us into harbor on a strange island. I would have rather come to anchor anywhere than here, quoth our captain. This island and all adjoining are inhabited by hairy savages who are certain to attack us. And whatever these dwarves may do, we dare not resist, since they swarm like locusts, and if one of them is killed, the rest will fall upon us, and speedily make an end of us. These words caused great consternation amongst the ship's company, and only too soon were we to find out that the captain spoke truly. There appeared to be a vast multitude of hideous savages, not more than 2 feet high, and covered in reddish fur. Throwing themselves into the waves, they surrounded our vessel, chattering meanwhile in a language we could not understand, and clutching at ropes and gangways, they swarmed up the ship's side with such speed and agility that they almost seemed to fly. You may imagine the rage and terror that seized us when we watched them, neither daring to hinder them nor able to speak a word to deter them from their purpose, whatever it might be. Of this we were not left long in doubt. Hoisting the sails and cutting the cable of the anchor, they sailed our vessel to an island which lay a little farther off, where they drove us ashore. Then, taking possession of her, they made off to the place from which they had come, leaving us helpless on the shore, avoided with horror by all mariners, for a reason which you shall soon learn. Turning away from the sea, we wandered miserably inland, finding as we went various herbs and fruits we ate, feeling that we might as well live long enough possible, though we had no hope of escape. Presently we saw in the far distance what seemed to us to be a splendid palace, towards which we turned our weary steps. But when we reached it, we saw that it was a castle, lofty and strongly built. Pushing back the heavy ebony doors, we entered the courtyard, but upon the threshold of the great hall beyond we paused, frozen with horror, at the sight that greeted us. On one side lay a pile of bones, human bones, and on the other numberless spits for roasting. That's a gruesome thought. Overcome with despair, we sank trembling to the ground and lay there without speech or motion. The sun was setting when a loud noise aroused us. The door of the hall was violently burst open, and a horrible giant entered. He was as tall as a palm tree and perfectly black, and had one eye, which flamed like a burning coal in the middle of his forehead. His teeth were long and sharp, and grinned horribly, while his lower lip hung down upon his chest, and he had ears like elephant ears, which covered his shoulders, and nails like claws of some fierce bird. At this terrible sight, our senses left us, and we lay like dead men. Smart strategy, Sinbad. When at last we came to ourselves, the giant sat examining us attentively with his fearful eye. Presently, when he had looked at us enough, he came towards us, and stretching out his hand, took me by the back of my neck. Turning me this way and that, but feeling that I was mere skin and bone, he sat me down again and went on to the next, whom he treated in the same fashion. At last, when he came to the captain, and finding him the fattest of us all, he took him up in one hand and struck him upon a spit, and proceeded to kindle a huge fire, at which he presently roasted him. After the giant had supped, he lay down to sleep, snoring like the loudest thunder, while we lay shivering with horror the whole night through. And when the day broke, he awoke and went out, leaving us in the castle. When we believed him to be really gone, we started bemoaning our horrible fate until the hall echoed with our despairing cries. Though we were many, and our enemy was alone, it did not occur to us to kill him. And indeed, we should have found that a hard task, even if we thought of it. And no plan could we devise to deliver ourselves. So at last, submitting to our sad fate, we spent the day in wandering up and down the island, eating such fruits we could find. And when night came, we returned to the castle, having sought in vain for any other place of shelter. At sunset, the giant returned, and supped upon one of our unhappy comrades, slept and snored till dawn, and then left us as before. Our condition seemed to us so frightful that several of my companions thought it would be better to leap from the cliffs and perish in the waves at once. Well, rather than wait so miserable an end. But I had a plan of escape, which I now unfolded to them, and which they once agreed to attempt. Listen, my brothers, I added. You know that plenty of driftwood lies along the shore. Let us make several rafts and carry them to a suitable place. If our plot succeeds, we can wait patiently for the chance of some passing ship, which would rescue us from this fatal island. Well, if it fails, we must quickly take to our rafts, frail as they are. We have more chance of saving our lives with them than we have if we remain here. All agreed with me, and we spent the day in building rafts, each capable of carrying 3 persons. At night, while we returned to the castle, and very soon in came the giant, and one more of our number was sacrificed. But the time of our vengeance was at hand. As soon as he had finished his horrible repast, he lay down to sleep as before. And when we heard him begin to snore, I and 9 of the boldest of my comrades rose softly, and each took a spit, which we made red hot in the fire, and then at the given signal we plunged it with one accord into the giant's eye, completely blinding him. With a terrible cry, he sprang to his feet, clutching in all directions to try to seize one of us, but we had all fled at different ways as soon as the deed was done, and thrown ourselves flat upon the ground in corners where he was not likely to touch us with his feet. After a vain search, he fumbled about until he found the door and fled out of it, howling frightfully. As for us, when he was gone, we made haste to leave the fatal castle, and stationing ourselves beside our rafts, we waited to see what would happen. Our idea was that when the sun rose, we saw nothing of the giant, and no longer heard his howls, which still came faintly through the darkness, growing more and more distant, we should conclude that, he was dead, and that we might safely stay upon the island and need not risk our lives upon the frail rafts. But alas, morning light showed our enemy approaching us, supported on either hand by 2 giants nearly as large and as fearful as himself, while a crowd of others followed closely upon their heels. Hesitating no longer, we clambered upon our rafts and rowed with all of our might out to sea. The giants, seeing their prey escaping them, seized up huge pieces of rock, and wading into the water, hurled them after us with such good aim that all of the rafts except the one that I was upon were swamped, and their luckless crews drowned. Without being able to do anything to help them. Indeed, I and my 2 companions had all we could to do to keep our own raft beyond the reach of the giants. But by dint of hard rowing, we had at last gained the open sea. Here, we were at the mercy of the winds and waves, which tossed us to and fro all that day and night. But the next morning we found ourselves near an island, which we gladly landed. There we found delicious fruits. Having satisfied our hunger, we presently lay down to rest upon the shore. Suddenly we were aroused by a loud rustling noise, and starting up, we saw that it was caused by an immense snake which was gliding toward us over the sand. So swiftly it came that it seized one of my comrades before he had time to fly, and in spite of his cries and struggles, speedily crushed the life out of him in its mighty coils and proceeded to swallow him. By this time, my other companion and I were running for our lives to some place where we might hope to be safe from this new horror, and seeing a tall tree, we climbed up into it. Having first provided ourselves with a store of fruit of the surrounding bushes, when night came, I fell asleep, only to be awakened once more by the terrible snake, which, after hissing horribly around the tree, at last reared itself up against it, finding my sleeping comrade who was perched just below me. It swallowed him also, and crawled away, leaving me half dead with terror. When the sun rose, I crept down from the tree with hardly a hope of escaping the dreadful fate which had overtaken my comrades. But life is sweet, and I determined to do all I could to save myself. All day long I toiled with frantic haste and collected quantities of dry brushwood, the reeds and thorns, which I bound it with faggots, which, by the way, that term is the bundle of sticks, not the term it is today. Moving on. And making a circle of them under my tree, I piled them firmly one upon another until I had a kind of tent in which I was crouched under like a mouse in a hole when she sees the cat coming. You may imagine what a fearful night I passed, for the snake returned eager to devour me, and glided around and found my frail shelter seeking an entrance. Every moment I feared that it would succeed in pushing aside some of the sticks, and happily for me they held together. And when it grew light, my enemy retired and baffled and hungry to his den. As for me, I was more dead than alive. Imagine that one. Giant snake, no big deal. Shaking half with fright and half suffocated by the poisonous breath of that monster, I came out of my tent and crawled down to the sea, feeling that it would be better to plunge from the cliffs and end my life at once than pass through such a night of horror. But to my joy and relief, I saw a ship sailing by, and by shouting wildly and waving my turban, I managed to attract the attention of her crew. A boat was sent to rescue me, and very soon I found myself on board, surrounded by a wondering crowd of sailors and merchants, eager to know what chance I found myself on that desolate island. After I had told my story, they regaled me with the choicest food of the ship afforded, and the captain, seeing that I was in rags, generously bestowed upon me one of his own coats. After sailing about for some time and touching at many ports, we came at last to the island of Salahat, where sandalwood grows in great abundance. Here we anchored, and as I stood watching the merchants disembarking their goods and preparing to sell or exchange them, the captain came up to me and said, "I have here, brother, some merchandise belonging to a passenger of mine who is dead. Will you do me the favor to trade with it? And when I meet with his heirs, I shall be able to give them the money, though it will be only just that you have a portion for your trouble." I contested gladly, for I did not like standing by idle. Whereupon he pointed the bales out to me and sent for the person whose duty it was to keep a list of goods who were upon the ship. When the man came, he asked in what name the merchandise was to be registered. "In the name of Sinbad the sailor," replied the captain. I was greatly surprised, but looking carefully at him, I recognized him to be the captain of the ship which I made my second voyage. And though he had altered much since that time, as for him, believing me to be dead. It was no wonder he had not recognized me. So, Captain, said I, the merchant who owned those bales was called Sinbad? Yes, he replied. He was so named. He belonged to Baghdad, and joined my ship at Balsora, but by mischance he was left behind upon a desert island, where we landed to fill our water casks, and it was not until 4 hours later that he was missed. By the time the wind had freshened, it was impossible to put back for him. Well, you suppose him to have perished then, said I. Alas, yes, he answered. Why, Captain, I cried, look well upon me. For I am that Sinbad who fell asleep upon the island one day and awoke to find himself abandoned. The captain stared at me in amazement, but was presently convinced that I was indeed speaking the truth, and rejoiced greatly at my escape. I am glad to have that piece of carelessness off my conscience at my rate, said he. Now take your goods and the profit I have made for you upon them, and may you prosper in future. I took them gratefully, and as we went from one island to another, I laid in stores of cloves, cinnamon, and other spices. In one place I saw a tortoise which was 20 cubits long and as many broad, and also a fish that was like a cow and had a skin so thick it was used to make shields. Another I saw was like a camel in shape and color. So by degrees we came back to Balsora, and I returned to Baghdad with so much money that I myself could not count it. Besides treasures without end, I gave largely to the poor, and bought much land to add to what I already possessed, and thus ended my third voyage. When Sinbad had finished his story, he gave another 100 sequins to Sinbad, who then departed with the other guests. But the next day, when they had all reassembled, and the banquet was ended, the host continued his adventures. All right, so let's review. Sinbad is not a very lucky sailor at all. He's been lost to sea. He's been nearly eaten. Those pygmies left him on an island. By the way, I'm going to apologize for using that F slur, but back then, that stood for a branch of sticks. Which, I did tell my friend Robin that, hey, that might come up, but as she put it, she was like, yeah, if it means the batch of sticks, that was how they wrote it back then. So, it is what it is. I'll change it to sticks when I see it if I can subconsciously see it. If not, it is what it is. The interpretation of the word faggot in that aspect means a batch of sticks or a tying of sticks. And I believe European nations still use that term today in that fashion. It's only in the American vernacular that's become taboo and dirty. Now, let me take a drink. And we shall carry on. As I told you, 4 voyages. We're on the 4th one. So, rich and happy as I was after my 3rd voyage, I could not make up my mind to stay at home altogether. My love of trading and the pleasure I took in anything that was new and strange made me set my affairs in order and begin my journey to some of the Persian provinces, having first sent stores of goods to await my coming in the different places I intended to visit. I took a ship at a different seaport, and for some time all went well, but at last, being caught in a violent hurricane, our vessel became a total wreck in spite of all of our worthy captain could do to save her, and many of our company perished in the waves. I, with a few others, had the good fortune to be washed ashore clinging to pieces of the wreck, for the storm had driven us near an island, and scrambling up beyond the reach of the waves, we threw ourselves down quite exhausted to wait for morning. At daylight we wandered around and soon saw some huts to which we directed our ships. As we drew near, the black inhabitants swarmed out in great numbers and surrounded us, and we were led to their houses, as it were to be divided among our captors. I, with 5 others, were taken into a hut, and we were made to sit upon the ground and certain herbs were given to us, which the blacks made signs to us to eat. Observing that they themselves did not touch them, I was careful to only pretend to taste my portion. But my companions, being very hungry, rashly ate up all that was set before them. And very soon I had the horror of seeing them becoming perfectly mad. Though they chattered incessantly, I could not understand a word they said, nor did they heed when I spoke to them. The savages now produced large bowls of rice and prepared with the coconut oil, of which my crazy comrades ate eagerly, but I only tasted a few grains, understandingly clear that the object of our captors was to fatten us up speedily for their own eating. And this was exactly what happened. My unlucky companions, having lost their reason, felt neither anxiety nor fear, and ate greedily all that was offered them. So they were soon fat, and there was an end of them. But I grew leaner by the day, for I ate but little, and even that little did me no good by reason of my fear of what lay before me. However, as I was so far from being a tempting morsel, I was allowed to wander about freely, and one day when all of the blacks had gone off, some expedition, leaving only an old man to guard me, I managed to escape from him and plunged into the forest. Running faster the more he cried to me to come back until I completely distanced him. For 7 days I hurried on, resting for only darkness stopped me, and living cheaply upon coconuts, which afforded me both meat and drink. And on the 8th day I reached the seashore and saw a party of white men gathering pepper, which grew abundantly about. Reassured by the nature of their occupation, I advanced toward them, and they greeted me in Arabic, asking who I was and whence I came. My delight was great on hearing this familiar speech, and I willingly satisfied their curiosity, telling them how I had been shipwrecked and captured by the blacks. "But these savages devour men," said they. "How did you escape?" And I repeated to them what I had told you, which they were mightily astonished. I stayed with them until I collected as much pepper as they wished, and they took me back to their own country and presented me to their king, by whom I was hospitably received. To him I also had to relate my adventures, which surprised him much, and when I had finished, he ordered that I should be supplied with food and raiment, and be treated with consideration. The island which I had found myself on was full of people, abounded in all sorts of desirable things, and a great deal of traffic went on in the capital, where I soon began to feel at home and contented. Moreover, the king treated me with special favor, and in consequence of this, everyone, whether at the court or in the town, sought to make life pleasant for me. One thing I remarked, which I thought was very strange. This was that, from the greatest to the least, all men rode their horses without bridle or stirrups. One day I presumed to ask His Majesty why he did not use them, to which he replied, "You speak to me of things of which I have never heard." This gave me an idea. I found a clever workman and made him cut out, under my direction, the foundation of a saddle, which I wadded and covered with the choice leather, adorning it with rich gold embroidery. Then I got a locksmith to make me a bit and a pair of spurs with a pattern that I drew for him. When all of these were completed, I presented them to the king and showed him how to use them. When I had saddled one of his horses, he had mounted it and rode it, quite delighted with the novelty. To show his gratitude, he rewarded me with large gifts. After this, I had to make saddles for all the principal officers of the king's household, and as they all gave me rich presents, I soon became very wealthy and quite an important person in the city. The king sent for me and said, "Sinbad, I am going to ask a favor of you. Both I and my servants esteem you and wish you to end your days among us. Therefore, I desire you marry a rich and beautiful lady, whom I will find for you, and think no more of your country." As the king's will was law, I accepted the charming bride he presented to me and lived happily with her. Nevertheless, I had every intention of escaping at the first opportunity and going back to Baghdad. Things were thus going prosperously with me when it happened that the wife of one of my neighbors, whom I had struck a friendship, fell ill and presently died. I went to his house to offer my consolations and found him in the depths of deep woe. "Heaven preserve you," said I, "and send you a long life." "Alas," he replied, what is the good of saying that when I have but an hour left to live?" "Come, come," said I, "surely it is not as bad as all that. I trust you will be spared to me for many years." "I hope," answered he, "that your life may be long, but as for me, all is finished. I have set my house in order, and today I shall be buried with my wife. This has been the law upon our island from the earliest ages. The living husband goes to the grave with his dead wife, and the living wife with her dead husband. So did our fathers, so we must do. So the law changes not, and we all must submit to it." As he spoke, the friends and relations of the unhappy pair began to assemble. The body, decked in rich robes and sparkling with jewels, was laid upon an open bier, and the procession started, taking its way to a high mountain at some distance from the city, the wretched husband, clothed from head to foot in a black mantle, following mournfully. When the place of interment was reached, the corpse was lowered, just as it was, into a deep pit. Then the husband, bidding farewell to all his friends, stretched himself upon another bier, upon which were laid 7 little loaves of bread and a pitcher of water. He was also let down, to the depths of the horrible cabin, and then a stone was laid over the opening, and the melancholy company wended its way back to the city. You may imagine that I was no unmoved spectator of these proceedings. To all the others it was a thing which they had been accustomed from their youth up. But I was so horrified, I could not help telling the king how horrible it struck me. "Sire," I said, "I am more astonished than I can express to you at the strange custom that which exists in your dominions of burying the living with the dead. In all my travels I have never once met with so cruel a horrible law." What would you have, Sinbad?" He replied, "It is the law for everybody. I myself should be buried with the queen if she were the first to die." "But, your majesty," said I, "dare I ask if this law applies to foreigners also?" "Why, yes," replied the king, "in what I could consider a very heartless manner. They are no exception to the rule if they have married in the country." When I heard this, I went home much cast down. From that time forward, my mind was never easy. If only my wife's little finger ached, I fancied she was going to die. And sure enough, before very long, she fell very ill, and in a few days breathed her last. My dismay was great, for it seemed to me that to be buried alive was a fate worse than being devoured by cannibals. Nevertheless, there was no escape. The body of my wife, arrayed in her richest robes and decked with all of her jewels, were laid upon the bier. I followed it, and after me came a great procession, headed by the king and all of his nobles. And in this manner we reached the fatal mountain, of which there was a lofty chain bordering the sea. Here I made one more frantic effort to excite the pity of the king and those who stood by, hoping to save myself, even at this last moment, but it was of no avail. No one spoke to me. They even appeared to hasten over their dreadful task, and I found myself speedily descending into the gloomy pit, well, with my 7 loaves and pitcher of water beside me. Almost before I reached the bottom, the stone was rolled into place above my head, and I was left to my fate. A feeble ray of light shone into the cavern, through some chink, and when I had the courage to look about me, I could see that I was in a vast vault, bestrewn with bodies and bones of the dead. I even fancied that I heard the expiring sighs of those like myself had come into this dismal place alive. All in vain did I shriek aloud with rage and despair, reproaching myself for the love of gain and adventure which had brought me to such a pass. But at length, growing calmer, I took up my bread and water, and wrapping my face in mantle, I groped my way towards the end of the cabin, where the air was fresher. Here I lived in darkness and misery until my provisions were exhausted. But just as I was nearly dead from starvation, the rock was rolled away and overhead, and I saw that a bier was being lowered into the cavern, and upon the corpse it was a man. In that moment, my mind was made up. The woman who had followed had nothing to expect but a lingering death. But I should be doing her a service if I shortened her misery. Therefore, when she descended, already insensible from terror, I was already armed with a huge bone, one blow which left her dead. I secured the bread and water, which gave me a hope of life. Several times did I have to resort to this desperate expedient. I know not how long I had been a prisoner when one day I fancied that I heard something near me, which breathed loudly. Turning to the place from which the sound came, I dimly saw a shadowy form, which fled at my movement. Squeezing itself through a cranny in the wall, I pursued it as fast as I could, and found myself in a narrow crack among the walls, along which I was just able to force my way. I followed it, what seemed to me, many miles, and at last saw before me a glimmer of light which grew clearer every moment until I emerged upon the seashore with a joy I cannot describe. When I was sure I was not dreaming, I realized that it was doubtless some little animal had found its way into the cavern from the sea, and when disturbed had fled, showing me a means of escape which I could have never discovered for myself. I hastily surveyed my surroundings and saw that I was safe from all pursuit from the town. The mountains sloped sheer down to the sea, and there was no road across them. Being assured of this, I returned to the cavern, and amassed a rich treasure of diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and jewels of all kinds which strewed the ground. These I made up into bales, and stored them into a safe place upon the beach, and waited hopefully for the next passing of a ship. I had looked out for 2 days before a single sail appeared, so it was with much delight that I at last saw a vessel not very far from the shore, and waving my arms and uttering loud cries succeeded in attracting the attention of her crew. A boat was sent off to me, and in answer to the questions of the sailors and how I came to be in such a plight, I answered that I had been shipwrecked 2 days before, but had managed to scramble ashore with the bales which I pointed to them. Luckily for me, they believed my story, and without even looking at the place where they found me, took up my bundles and rowed me back to the ship. Once on board, I saw that the captain was too much occupied with the difficulties of navigation to pay much heed to me, though he generously made me welcome and would not even accept the jewels which I offered to pay for my passage. Our voyage was prosperous, and after visiting many lands and collecting in each place a great store of goodly merchandise, I found myself at last in Baghdad once more, with unheard of riches of every description. Again I gave large sums of money to the poor and enriched all the mosques in the city, after which I gave myself up to my friends and relations, whom I passed my time in feasting and merriment. Here Sinbad paused, and his hearers all declared that the adventures of his fourth adventure and his fourth voyage had pleased them better than anything that they had heard before. They then took their leave, followed by Sinbad, who had once more received 100 sequins. And, with the rest, had been bidden to return the next day for the story of the fifth voyage. When the time came, all were in their places, and when they had eaten and drunk all that was set before them, then Sinbad began his tale. Right. That was a lot to take in. So, Sinbad's third voyage, he met the captain from the second voyage. Sinbad had laid on an island. He was asleep. They left him behind. They thought he was dead. Then, you think about it, Sinbad's fourth voyage, he ended up on an island of cannibals. He escaped an island of cannibals and then went to an island where you die with your spouse whenever your spouse dies. Sounds like he went to, I want to say he probably went to Ireland or Wales. That sounds like a tradition that either of them had. We have the bundle of sticks thing again. And then they referred to African people as the blacks, so he probably wandered towards the African continent. And during their voyages, when they were heading towards the Persian provinces, they call them, Persia did have quite an enterprise. But after he did that, he was rescued by a crew of white men who knew Arabic, so I'm going to guess probably one of the, at the time, Albion, which was now the United Kingdom, one of those countries, or it could have been Ireland. We don't know. But I'm going to adjust my glasses here. Anyhow, and up on this island, creature snuck in, he snuck out, he's back to Baghdad. Every time he's on one of these voyages, he gives alms to the poor, gives alms to the mosque, and then he'll venture out again. I don't know. I think I'm going to try to conquer the last voyages he does, because he has 7 in total, so we've covered 4. So we're over halfway through his voyages. So I think here is going to be a good stopping point. I'm going to cover the rest of his voyages next Friday. I think I'm going to try to do all 3, so it might run over a little bit. But go ahead and check me out. I have all my links on this Twitch page, and I'm going to have all my links on my page. You can follow me on Twitter at BlueCollarJM. And my podcast is on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, wherever you listen. Blue Collar Philosophy. I thank you for coming to this stream, the few people that do. I will be reading Tuesday. I have not decided. I will figure it out when I get there. But thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Everyone have a good day.